Welcome to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. In this episode's main segment, I'm going to be reviewing the film Identity Thief, written by Craig Mazin. The film is currently available on HBO Go, so if you haven't seen the film, go check it out. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving a review in iTunes, or if you're watching this on YouTube, please give it a like and leave a comment. I want to improve this podcast, so some honest, constructive feedback is very much appreciated. I want to thank Chong Mons, who gave me a nice iTunes review, and I want to thank Ginger Shine and Jeffrey Brown, who left me nice comments on the YouTube video of the podcast. To try and generate some iTunes reviews, I'm going to be giving away one free email and fax blast to someone who leaves a review on iTunes from now until the end of January 2014. This fax email blast is the same blast that I use for my own screenplays, and it's the same blast that I sell on my blog. So just leave me an honest review on iTunes, and then during the first episode in February 2014, I'll randomly pick one person who's left a comment on iTunes. And they'll have their choice of either a free Agents and Managers blast or a free Producers blast. Also, I'll be picking a name from everyone who has posted a comment, including the people who have already posted. So if you've already posted a comment, you're already entered to win. I'm not a lawyer, so I really don't know all the legal ramifications of doing something like this, but I'll just say void where prohibited. To be eligible, you must post your comment through the iTunes interface. If you live in a small country and you leave a comment, drop me an email. iTunes makes it pretty hard to dig through the comments from other countries, and I'll be checking the US, UK, Australia, and Canada. But if you don't live in one of those countries, just drop me an email telling me which country you live in and where your comment is, so I'll be sure to check that country. Thank you. A couple of quick notes. Any website or links that I mention in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcasts. Also, if you want my free guide, How to Sell Your Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks, along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide, how to write a professional logline and query letter, how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. It really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. A quick few words about what I'm working on. The main thing I've done these past couple of weeks is a blast for my sci-fi thriller. The response hasn't been terribly great, at least in terms of overall script requests. This is the third blast I've done for myself in the past 6 months. In September, I did a blast for my one-location sexy thriller. So far, I've only received about 1/3 of the number of script requests for this sci-fi thriller as I did for the one-location thriller. Part of it might be the time of the year, but it also might be the marketability of the concept, but I'm honestly not sure. One thing I'll say, though, is the quality of responses seems a bit better than with the sexy thriller. I got quite a few people requesting the sexy thriller who were looking to make films on a micro budget. And I think most producers realize that they won't be able to shoot a sci-fi screenplay on a micro budget. So while there has been a lot fewer script requests, I do think the requests have been higher quality overall. But ultimately, it's about getting the script options and sold, so we'll see if that does pan out. I've mentioned my baseball comedy a few times on the podcast. My guess is when all the script requests are counted, this sci-fi script will end up with about the same number of script requests as that one got. And I actually talked to a producer a couple of weeks ago who got my query letter for the baseball script last June. And while he hasn't optioned the script, he actually is trying to talk with a minor league baseball team about possibly doing a co-production with him. So you never know where these blasts are going to end up. So now let's get into the main segment. Today I'm going to be examining the film Identity Thief to see what we can learn as screenwriters. The screenwriter, Craig Mazin, is one half of the Script Notes podcast, and they're always reviewing other people's screenplays on their podcast, so I thought it would be fun to review something he wrote. This critique is based solely from watching the movie and not from actually reading the screenplay. I did look around for the actual screenplay and I couldn't find it, So if you have it, please email it to me and I'll add it to my script library. The original story was written by another writer, Jerry Eaton, and I even read somewhere that the director, Seth Gordon, did some rewriting on the project too. So this is definitely not a critique of the script that Craig Mazin wrote. It's really just a look at the finished film and the lessons we can learn as screenwriters from the film. It's quite possible that some of the issues that I had with the script are issues that the writer had too, but he just couldn't get them implemented for whatever reason. This probably goes without saying, but there are many spoilers in this review. So if you haven't seen the movie and want to see it before hearing how the story all works, hit the pause button now and go watch it. It's available on HBO Go as of right now, mid-December 2013. So you can see it there or spend a few bucks and watch it on iTunes. Okay, so what can we learn as screenwriters from Identity Thief? There were some good things that I thought the filmmakers did extremely well in Identity Thief. First, I thought the filmmakers did a good job setting up the characters and making us like them. Jason Bateman was set up as being good at his job, a devoted family man, and while he may be a little spineless, he's still someone that we all like and can relate to. And they set this up very quickly. Every action and word that he speaks helps to really set this character up very nicely and quickly. I think a lot of the people can relate to this guy right off the bat. He works really hard for his boss, and his boss basically craps on him. I really like the opening scene with Jason Bateman and Jon Favreau, where the boss is basically giving himself a big fat bonus. Jon Favreau is a really funny guy and a writer himself, so some of this might have been his ad-libbing, but I actually think this is one of the funniest scenes in the movie. But the opening scene with Melissa McCarthy is probably one of the most well-crafted scenes in the film. It's much more difficult to get us to like her because she's basically a pretty despicable person. We see immediately that she's stealing this guy's identity, and obviously we're not going to necessarily relate to her or even like her. I'm not sure they were able to get us to really like her, but they were able to get us to feel sorry for her. Even though she stole Jason Bateman's identity, it's a really, really strong scene that gets our sympathy immediately. And I really think it's absolutely critical for this film to work, because ultimately this is really a two-hander. And if we don't like McCarthy's character, the whole film is sunk. It was a fun opening scene too, and it really had a nice impact. And the most obvious reaction to all of this is a real hatred of her, because we're all sitting there thinking, geez, someone could do this to me. But at the same time, we see her interacting with these people. We see how mean they are to her. And so we immediately have a lot of sympathy for her. Another big thing that they did really well was that the characters both had clear arcs. And this isn't something that's as easy as it looks. Jason Bateman goes from being a schmuck at the beginning of the film who basically took crap to being someone who stands up for himself. His change was probably less than the Melissa McCarthy's character. McCarthy's arc was pretty dramatic. She goes from being a loner, a loser, a thief, to really connecting with someone and being redeemed and doing the right thing at the end of the movie. Obviously, she never would have turned herself in for Jason Bateman being in the script, but it's very believable that she would do this at the end. As I said, this seems easy, but trust me, to actually pull this off in a screenplay is very hard. Go back and reread a few of your screenplays and really see if there is a clear, fluid arc to the main characters. If you can do this one thing as well as they do in this script, you'll be ahead of probably 97% of the screenplays floating around out there. Another thing that the filmmakers did very well was they made the story very, very clear. Jason Bateman, right at the act break, laid out the story. He told us exactly what he was going to do. He was going to go get the thief, bring her back to Denver so that he could record her admitting that she had stolen his identity. It might have been a little on the nose and clunky, but it was exceedingly clear, and we weren't left wondering, where is this story going? I see this problem so often with screenplays from newer writers. After 10 or so pages, I start wondering, where is this story going? What's happening? What's the point of these scenes? And really, if your scripts wander a little bit, look at this opening. As I said, it's probably the first act break. So around page 25, have a look at it. Again, it's a little clunky and maybe a little on the nose, but it absolutely clearly lays out the story and lets us know exactly where this story is going. So now let's talk about some of the problems that I saw with the film. In Blake Snyder's Save the Cat, he talks about making sure you answer the question, what is it? To me, this was the biggest issue that this film had. It felt at times like it was an action buddy comedy. Other times the comedy got very broad and slapsticky, almost bordered on spoof. And yet other times there were these dramatic, heartfelt moments between the two main characters. Ultimately, I think the marketing people did a really good job overcoming this by billing this as a broad R-rated comedy. Except for a few F-bombs, this movie really wasn't an R-rated comedy. They certainly could have gotten a PG very easily, but I suspect they wanted to market this as an R-rated comedy, so that's the direction they went, and I think it was a smart move. So let's get into some specifics. There was a number of logic issues that kind of took me out of the story, so let's talk about those for a second. The first thing that struck me as really odd was when they arrested Jason Bateman's character. I'm not a cop and I've never played one on TV, but I'm pretty sure that these arrest warrants would have stuff like age, weight, height, eye color, and of course gender. So it seemed very odd that they would arrest him and be absolutely convinced that he was the criminal. The cop, played by Morris Chestnut, just didn't seem to act like a real cop. My wife actually found a knife in our backyard years ago, and she called the LAPD, and the guy on the other end of the line, he literally said to her, "This isn't CSI." So I have no doubt that the reality of being a cop isn't like what we see on CSI and other cop shows, but the Morris Chestnut character was just so unprofessional as to really strain credibility. When he thought Jason Bateman was the criminal, he was hot to arrest him. But once it wasn't Jason Bateman, he just didn't seem to care at all about arresting the criminal. All he did was give reasons why they couldn't go arrest her. Jason Bateman tells him about the nail salon appointment, and the Chestnut character just shrugs it off without even trying to contact the Florida police. And it just seemed really hard to believe. And then later, when Jason Bateman's character comes up with the plan to lure the thief back to Denver, Morris Chestnut thinks this sounds like a great idea. Again, I'm not a policeman and I've never played one on TV, but I just don't think policemen go around recommending that you confront criminals and try and bring them across the country and trap them. And then there's the boss who is ready to fire Jason Bateman even though he knows he's innocent. It just didn't seem like a real reaction from a real person. The boss said he was the best at what he did earlier in the movie, so there's certainly some respect that this boss has for the Jason Bateman's character. And Jason Bateman actually quit his old job to go with this new company, so there must have been at least some kind of a bond there, and yet this boss is just completely ready to fire him for really no good reason. And then the thing that seemed really odd was his whole reasoning seemed to be that he didn't want the police coming around. He didn't want the look that there was something going on, something bad going on. And yet he's happy to allow Jason Bateman to bring a criminal into the office and allow the police to then come in and trap her. So it just seemed like a really odd reaction from the boss. So now let's talk about the main premise of the film. As I mentioned earlier, the plan was very laid out and we knew exactly what was going to happen. So that was all well done. Again, maybe a little clunky exposition, but it was handled quickly and efficiently. So the story had some good forward momentum. However, the plan just didn't seem to make sense to me, and I was taken out of the story while I tried to process what it was Jason Bateman's character was going to go and do. I think it might be worth taking a step back and explaining what the story is all about for people who haven't seen the film. So the basic premise of the whole film is Jason Bateman's character has his identity stolen by Melissa McCarthy's character. Bateman realizes that she's going to be where she's going to be when he gets a phone call from a nail salon confirming an appointment. Apparently, the nail salon Googled him and found his phone number since McCarthy's character didn't leave a number. That seemed a little hard to believe, but that's maybe a minor issue. The police won't help Jason Bateman, which, as I mentioned earlier, seems a little contrived. So Bateman must go to Florida and bring her back himself. His plan is to tell her that he just wants her to explain what happened to his boss so he can get his job back. But really, he'll be recording her, and then the police will arrest her. As you can tell from this description, there are a lot of things that must happen for this premise to work. The police have to be unwilling to help, but willing to go along with Bateman's plan. His boss has to want to fire him. But mostly, Jason Bateman must believe that he can pull this off. It seemed unfathomable to me that a normal, everyday guy, basically a guy like myself, thought he was going to be able to do this. Now, if it were set up as a sort of Dog the Bounty Hunter character, okay, I could believe it. The type of sketchy person who's involved in identity theft is liable to shoot you if you were to go and confront them. And there was never any mention of this potential danger. I mean, we're dealing with a criminal here. Sure, we as the audience have seen Melissa McCarthy, so we might not think she's so threatening, but Jason Bateman's character doesn't know this. But even if she's not dangerous, why would Bateman think that McCarthy would drive across the country with him and admit what she's done to his boss, to anyone? What's in it for her? I just couldn't get past this, and it was never really explained. I want to stop and talk about the concept for a moment. I sort of feel like this concept is what I call pseudo-high concept. At first glance, it seems really high concept. A guy whose identity is stolen must travel across the country with the thief. There's conflict. It's easy to pitch. You can sort of see the movie in your head. That's all great stuff. But as you dig into the concept, it starts to unravel, and there's a lot of stuff that has to happen that the character's motivation requires a lot of explaining. And this is a problem that I see at all levels of screenwriting, right up to produced Hollywood movies. If you think about some of the truly high concept premises of all time, one of the criteria is that they don't require a ton of explaining and weird characters to make them work. For instance, think about Jurassic Park. Sure, there is a leap that you have to take to buy into the technology of creating dinosaurs, but except for that one leap, it pretty much plays out in a fairly logical fashion. One other small issue that I just wanted to mention was the scene where they're in a car and Bateman is really annoyed by Melissa McCarthy's singing. We've seen that scene so many times, I'm really not sure how it could end up in a film anymore. There's always these lists floating around of cliched things that you should never do in your screenplay, and that should definitely be on the list. So the next issue that I had with the film, and this isn't necessarily a problem, it's more a choice that the filmmakers made, but I think it didn't jive quite right with the rest of the film. There were no real stakes in this movie. All the stakes had been deflated. At one point, Melissa McCarthy is in a van that rolls over several times, and she walks away from the accident with nothing more than a bloody nose. And then towards the end of the film, she literally gets hit by a car, and she walks away with barely a scratch on her. So in the world that the filmmakers have created, there is really no danger or chance of anyone getting hurt. This isn't necessarily a problem, as some films can work at that level. Again, to use Anchorman as an example, the stakes were pretty thin because the whole thing was pretty ridiculous. There's that scene where Jack Black throws the dog over the bridge, and you could literally tell that it was just a stuffed dog and not the real dog. So yeah, the stakes were deflated, but again, it was funny enough that you didn't care. I'm using Anchorman here as an example because the sequel is about to come out. It's been almost 10 years since the original one came out, and it's kind of considered a comedy classic at this point, so I just thought it would be a good film to reference. So in Identity Thief, it didn't quite feel like the spoofy tone was in line with the quiet moments between Bateman and McCarthy as they bonded and became real friends, and I think that was a mistake. So I just want to take a second to compare Identity Thief to the movie Flight, the Robert Zemeckis film starring Denzel Washington. It may seem like an odd comparison, but I think there are some good lessons we can learn here. I just watched Flight on Netflix, so it's pretty fresh in my mind. In Flight, they have this crazy plane crash where Washington inverts the plane to try and gain some elevation. It's unbelievable, but here's the thing. The way the people in the film react is exactly how real people would react. They can't believe he inverted the commercial jetliner either. They think it's as incredible as I do. His co-pilot thinks he's crazy when he suggests it. The guy he's communicating with on his headset can't believe it. And then after the crash, they keep talking about how incredible it was and how good of a pilot he must be to able to pull this off. And they talk about how they ran simulations with other pilots and none of them could safely land a plane in the same circumstances. I'm not a pilot, so I really have no idea if inverting a commercial airline is even possible. But they created a world where people reacted in a believable fashion, and so it worked. They addressed the issues like real people, so I bought it. In Identity Thief, no one ever mentioned the danger of what Bateman was doing or even really questioned the plausibility of his plan. So it just didn't seem believable, and it just didn't seem to really have its stakes. So now I want to talk about stakes for a second. This is an important point, and again, there's no right answer, but the key as a writer is being aware of what's going on and making the right choice one way or another for your film. The other key takeaway from the movie Flight, and the reason it worked so well, is that the stakes were painfully real. A few people died in the plane crash, and we saw some genuine sadness from the people who knew them. Washington went to the funeral for one of the women who died in the crash, and you could tell he felt very badly he hadn't been able to save everyone. And then at the end, the final crushing blow for Washington was that he simply could not let the dead woman take the blame for the empty vodka bottles. He just felt too guilty and couldn't do it anymore. Again, it's a real person with real emotions acting exactly how real people act. They made the stakes real by creating characters that were real who acted like real people. Washington was facing going to jail. It was a real problem with real stakes. That's how you get the audience's sympathy. In Identity Thief, on the one hand, they were trying to get us to feel real emotions for the characters and tried to create this nice arc for them as they bonded. But on the other hand, there were no real stakes, and some of the humor was really broad and almost bordered on spoof. It's virtually impossible for an audience to feel real, genuine emotion for characters in a movie where there are no stakes and the logic doesn't really make sense. Again, look at a movie like Anchorman. Do any of us feel any real emotion for the characters in Anchorman? I don't think we do, but it was funny enough that it's enjoyable to watch, and it's a good film because it's so funny. Now, I don't think the filmmakers of Identity Thief were going for an Anchorman type of film. They certainly weren't going for something like Flight. So the one last comparison I want to make is to the great John Hughes movies, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. I think that's ultimately what the filmmakers were going for, even if the studio wanted something much more broad. Planes, Trains, and Automobiles had some big laughs. I would certainly argue much bigger than Identity Thief. So you can get some big laughs in a film that has real characters. The premise of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles was much simpler, not nearly as contrived, so they didn't have all of these logic issues. And they had real stakes. There's that great scene where they're going down the freeway the wrong way and the two 18-wheelers nearly run them over. It's not only hilarious, it has real stakes because the Steve Martin character and the John Candy character act like real people. They're scared out of their minds. And there's that great scene where the policeman pulls them over and gets a look at their burned up car. And he reacts exactly how a real policeman would react if he pulled someone over whose car was burned to a crisp. Again, this is not just funny, but it's also very real, and that's how you keep the stakes real and keep the characters real. And then at the end of the film, we really felt badly for John Candy. The two characters had really bonded, and the sort of sappy, feel-good ending really worked. The main point to bringing this film up is that you can have a film that gets big laughs and still has real stakes with real characters that we care about. For all the reasons I've just mentioned, I just didn't feel much for the characters in Identity Thief. I would say there are two key takeaways. If the filmmakers wanted to make a big broad comedy, they should have gone harder in that direction and spent more time and energy trying to be funny and less time on trying to build the characters. If they were going for more of a heartwarming comedy like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, they should have gone harder in that direction, given us some real stakes that had some real consequences, shored up the logic issues, and probably tried to make the story much simpler, and made sure that the characters acted like real people with real problems. And this all goes back to my main issue with the film, which is that I don't think the filmmakers really answered the Blake Snyder question, what is it? The film just felt like it was off tone to me. It felt like it crossed tone many times. Ultimately, this film was a success. According to the Wikipedia page, it was made for $35 million and grossed $173 million. So that's a pretty solid number. I think it basically worked because they did a good job marketing it as an R-rated comedy. There is a market for R-rated comedies. On the poster, they sold it as being from the director of Horrible Bosses and the producer of Ted. So they had a clear market in mind for this film, even though I don't think this film was really meant for those exact same fans. But the film just feels like the studio wanted one type of film while the filmmakers wanted to make another type of film. Ultimately, the marketing department did a good job to get this movie to profitability. A quick plug for some of my paid services. If you've written a few screenplays and you need some help marketing them, please consider joining Selling Your Screenplay Select. I offer a whole host of services through my Select program, including access to my agents and managers and producers' email and fax blasts. I'll help you with your logline and query letter, and I run monthly conference calls where you can ask me any screenwriting-related questions. To learn more, simply go to www.sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. In the next episode, I'll finally be interviewing producer Mark Heidelberger. He's got a wealth of experience in screenplay development and will be examining some recent films like Dallas Buyers Club and Gravity. This episode will be out January 6, 2014, so keep an eye out for it. In this week's Writing Words section, I want to build on what I talked about in the main segment. I get people emailing me all the time asking me if I will read their screenplay, and a lot of them say something like, I just want to know if it's good enough. Here's the thing. If you have to ask if it's good enough, it means it's not good enough. I hope everyone who's listening to this podcast takes some time to really break down the films that they watch, like I have here with Identity Thief. Hopefully, you have your own opinions about the film, and maybe you have some arguments to counter what I've said, or even found some problems with the film that I didn't mention. But the point is, you must watch films and really analyze them like I did with Identity Thief today. If you want to be a professional screenwriter, you must be able to do this. If you don't feel like your script analysis skills are as good as mine, great. Start really spending some time thinking about films and watching and why they worked or didn't work. You get better. With each script that you break down, you'll get better. This process of really breaking films down, even successful ones, and trying to learn from them will really help you with your own writing. Then you won't have to ask me if your script is good enough. You'll know if it is. Screenwriting is not just guesswork. I mean, if you can't break films down and understand their mechanics, how do you expect to write a screenplay? I mentioned the Script Notes podcast earlier that Craig Mazin does. They do these 3-page challenges, and I'm always amazed at how many comments they can make about a writing sample when they're only reading 3 pages. This is what you must do if you want to get to their level. You must be able to really go deep into the inner working of a screenplay if you ever expect to be a professional. So anyway, today is the last podcast of the year. I really hope you've enjoyed the podcasts and videos I've created. I want to wish everyone who's listening happy holidays. Keep writing, and may 2014 be the best year of your life. Thanks for listening.